Hello, I'm Wendy. I'm going to be painting some greetings cards today. The subject is primroses and it's a watercolour tutorial. Primroses come in all sorts of colours, don't they? But today I'm going to be looking at the wild primrose, the very pale ones that you're seeing now in the woods. I found painting the shadows on the petals quite a challenge. I don't think I'm on my own in this. I think yellow flowers are one of the most difficult flowers to paint, and especially these very pale ones. After a lot of experimenting, I did come up with 2 or 3 ideas for the shadows. You'll see how I got on later on in the video. Here's the design that I used. The image itself is about 4 inches by 4 inches, and I did that size because that would fit the Aperture cards that I'm using. What I actually did was I did this design in ink, and then I put it on a light box and I traced it onto watercolour paper. I did a lot of these and I didn't want to be doing the same drawing over and over, so that's a good tip for you. If you don't have a light box, you can trace your drawing or hold it up against a window. That works quite well, especially if you've done it in ink, and then trace the image onto your watercolour paper. It's not too difficult to design your own image for a card. You could have a go at that, or you could download this image. There's a link in the description box below. I did mask out the flowers to make it easier to put the background on. If you don't like using masking fluid, you could wet around the flowers and drop the colours in, but I find it easier using the masking fluid. And for this reason, I've done a little demonstration just to remind you how to use the masking fluid. I'm using Pebeo masking gum, and I've given you a link to that if you want to get hold of some. This gum is very fluid and you can apply it really nicely. As you can see here, I'm putting the masking fluid on just the same way as I would be painting the flower. I'm being very, very careful. I'm keeping the brush loaded with the fluid and I'm keeping the edges wet, so that I can, as I said, I can just work it as though I would be putting on a flat wash. The brush I'm using is a very small synthetic brush. You can get special masking fluid brushes as well, which are quite easy to get hold of. And as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm occasionally washing the brush in some diluted washing up liquid, drying it off a little bit before I continue masking out the flower. This protects the brush and it stops the hairs sticking together once you've finished. I do give the brush an extra good wash in soapy water though when I have finished. When the masking fluid was completely dry, I started putting the background washes around the flowers. You can wet the paper first before dropping in the colour with plain water, or you can just drop your lighter colours in first and then drop the darker colours in afterwards. My lighter colours are a yellow. You could use a lemon yellow or a warmer yellow, something like cadmium yellow, but it's going on very pale. I'm using sap green and I'm also using cadmium orange at this stage. The next job is to drop in the darker greens to stand for the leaves that are around the flowers. The greens I've used are made with Prussian blue as the base blue and with burnt sienna to darken it, and also dropped a little bit of yellow in there if you want to make it a little bit brighter. I have a video which explains my mixing of greens, and I'll put a link to that in the description box below. Since making that video, I have also experimented a bit and found that the Prussian blue works very well with the cadmium orange to make a darker warm green as well. So you could incorporate the cadmium orange into your mixes. I'm progressively adding some darker mixes of colour to get some nice dark tones around the flowers. As a tip, in order to get these nice dark tones, then don't spread the paint around too much. People do have problems in getting darks, but once you've got your nice dark mix, load your brush and put it into the area that you want to put the paint. Then go back to your mix again and put some more in. So you're keeping loading your brush with these nice dark greens, and they'll sink into the paper and they will give you more of the effect that you're looking for, I think, than spreading the paint around too much, if that makes sense. I finished up here with this wash by putting a few shapes in that looked a little bit more like leaves rather than just the general brush strokes that I've been using. I felt I wanted to break up some of those lines a little bit, so I put some clean water on a little brush and just splattered a little bit of water on there. I think this gives a nice little textural effect, and it's quite different from using the salt, which I do use sometimes, but didn't want to use it on this painting. I used a little bit of Dioxazine violet here for no special reason. It darkens the green a little bit, I think, and adds a little bit more interest in terms of colour. As I said earlier, I experimented with a lot of these little pictures, and I did lots of these experimental backgrounds. Here's a demonstration of another one. I've speeded it up because it does get quite repetitive. After removing the masking fluid and reinforcing the drawing a little bit, this was the effect that I got. And this was another one, worked the same way, a softer effect on this with a little bit more of the Prussian blue in there. So I'm going back to the first one I did to show you how I painted the flowers. I call this my messy wash, and I didn't think it was going to work out very well, but in the end I think it worked out as my favourite card. There's a little close-up here just to show you how I get the effect of some of the petals sort of folding over, curling over, and you can see there that I've just left a little bit of white on the top edge of that left-hand flower. I'm using a very watery mix of a pale yellow, and it's cadmium yellow pale. While this wash was still wet, I used some cadmium orange to put in the centre orange pattern on the flowers. Working into the slightly damp wash gives you a nice soft edge on those orange areas. Looking at the flower now, you can see there's a slightly darker line radiating out from the centre of the flower. I put that in. I wanted to keep it quite soft though, so I think I did go back with a slightly damp brush just to soften those lines so they didn't stand out too much. As I said at the beginning of the video, I did find it very difficult to get the right shadow colour to separate the petals. Remember, when you're painting flowers, these pencil lines are going to be rubbed out, so you need to put some shadows on there to separate the petals and to give a sense of form in the flower. Here I'm mixing a shadow colour using ultramarine and Davy's grey. Now Davy's grey is a colour I've never used before. I just happened to have some in my drawer and I was reading up, how to put shadows onto flowers, and they suggested using a blue with Davy's grey, so I gave it a shot. I think it can work quite nicely. The Davy's grey is very neutral and seems to be a very good mixer with a little bit of the blue for the shadow. I am going to continue to use that and experiment with it. I suggest that if you want to, get yourself some Davy's grey and have a go, but there's certainly no need to rush out and to buy it just to do this painting. I will suggest some more ideas for shadow colours a little bit later on in the video. I thought it might be useful to see a close-up here, especially for beginners. Putting the shadow colours on, what I tend to do is, as you can see, I put a little layer of colour to separate the leaves, and then I wash off my brush, take a bit of the water off, and then I spread out that shadow colour very softly with some water so that I don't get a very hard line. Again, I'll speed this repetitive bit of painting up for you. I'm working around the flower in exactly the same way, putting these grey-blue shadows to separate the petals. It is a very, very subtle effect of the shadows on these very pale yellow flowers. Close up, I don't think it seems to work that well, but once the pencil lines are rubbed out and the colours have dried back, then you'll see that it does work, and I'm finding that this is a very good shadow colour myself to work with. This is the Davy's grey with just a touch of the blue in it. Work a little bit of the shadow colour in the same way underneath the white areas that you left for the curling over petals, and that should work quite nicely. I use a little bit of the darker green for the centre of the petals. When the painting was totally dry, I rubbed out all the pencil lines, and it certainly does make a difference. And then I put one of my Aperture cards around the picture and move it around. I had a little bit of wriggle room, moved it around to get the composition that I liked the best. And I was quite pleased with this actually. I thought the messiness and the texture worked quite well, and I'd managed to get some of the darker greens behind the petals to get some contrast in there. I think the shadows are working without being too intrusive on the flower. This is a still of the second picture that I painted with the tidier wash, if you like. Now the shadows I put on here, I used a very, very dilute mixture of just ultramarine, and it was almost just stained water. If you get it too thick, it's just not going to work. So keep the mix nice and fluid and very, very pale. This was the painting using that wash. This is the painting using that final wash where I used more Prussian blue. And here I actually used a very, very dilute Prussian blue for the shadows on the flowers. As always, I hope you found this video useful, and I hope it inspires you to paint your own primrose pictures. If you did enjoy, then you can give me a thumbs up, and you can always subscribe to my channel so you don't miss anything coming up in the future. Bye for now.